Number 1. Robert and Michael Bever, the family massacre that shocked America. In a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, the Bever family was known for keeping to themselves. Their home sat on a calm, tree-lined street, the kind of place where people leave doors unlocked and wave to neighbors. But behind those walls, something dark had been growing. On the night of July 22nd, 2015, it exploded into one of the most horrifying family massacres in American history. Just before midnight, a 13-year-old girl placed a frantic 911 call. Her voice was low, terrified. She whispered that her brothers were attacking her family. Police rushed to the scene and were met with a house soaked in blood. Inside, 5 members of the Bever family were dead. All had been stabbed repeatedly with knives and hatchets. The bodies were found in different rooms, some with over 20 stab wounds. But the most disturbing part, the killers were not strangers. They were the victims' own sons, 18-year-old Robert Bever and his 16-year-old brother, Michael. The victims included their parents, David and April Bever, as well as 3 of their siblings, 12-year-old Daniel, 7-year-old Christopher, and 5-year-old Victoria. The 13-year-old sister who made the emergency call was critically wounded, stabbed multiple times, but miraculously survived. A 2-year-old toddler was found in the house physically unharmed, likely overlooked during the frenzy. What investigators uncovered in the following days defied all logic. The murders weren't impulsive. They were part of a meticulously crafted plan. Robert and Michael Bever had been preparing for months. Their goal was to become the most infamous mass murderers in U.S. history. According to Robert's confession, the family massacre was only the first step. The brothers intended to flee the scene, steal a car, and begin a nationwide killing spree. Their target? At least 50 people, maybe more. They idolized mass shooters like the Columbine killers. Investigators found a computer filled with online searches for how to kill silently, how to disable security systems, and how to evade law enforcement. There were also spreadsheets detailing weapons, kill counts, and escape routes. One of the most haunting discoveries was a USB drive containing a video diary. In it, Robert calmly discussed his plans to kill, describing the anticipation and the thrill he expected to feel. The boys had also installed a home surveillance system. Chillingly, they recorded portions of the massacre, capturing their movements as they stalked through the house. These were not the actions of disturbed children acting out. These were methodical, deliberate executions, driven not by rage, but by a desire to make history as killers. Robert, the older brother, appeared to be the ringleader. In interviews, he was cold, calculating. He referred to the murders as necessary. Michael, only 16, was more emotionally complex. Some experts believe he may have been manipulated or coerced by Robert. Others argue he was a willing participant, fully aware of what he was doing. Either way, both were charged as adults with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill. During the trial, Robert showed no remorse. He smiled in court. He corrected news reports that misstated the number of stab wounds. His detachment from the horror of what he had done was chilling. Michael, on the other hand, sobbed openly at times. He later claimed he had second thoughts before the attack, but was afraid of what Robert might do if he backed out. Robert pleaded guilty and received 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Michael went to trial and was also sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 38 years due to his age at the time of the crimes. The community of Broken Arrow was left shattered. No one saw it coming. The Bever family was private, but never gave any overt signs of abuse or dysfunction, at least none that neighbors recognized. In the aftermath, the home where the murders took place was demolished. A memorial garden was built in its place, dedicated to the innocent lives lost: Daniel, Christopher, Victoria, David, and April. But even that peaceful tribute couldn't erase the deep scar left behind. The question still lingers: how could 2 teenagers, raised in the same household, with the same parents and the same upbringing, turn into cold-blooded killers. Some say it was the isolation. The Bever children were homeschooled with limited contact outside the family. Others point to unchecked mental illness or a toxic dynamic between the brothers, where violent fantasies were encouraged and reinforced. There's even speculation about possible abuse within the home, though that remains unproven. What's certain is this: the Bever brothers planned to kill. They prepared, and when the time came, they executed their family with terrifying efficiency. This wasn't a snap decision. It was a mission. To this day, few juvenile murder cases have matched the brutality, planning, and sheer emotional detachment of the Bever massacre. It remains one of the darkest chapters in modern American true crime. Number 2. Tyler Hadley, the teen who murdered his parents. The Hadley household looked like any other in the neighborhood: suburban, quiet, and ordinary. But what happened inside that home would become one of the most shocking and disturbing crimes ever committed by a teenager in the United States. At the center of it all was 17-year-old Tyler Hadley. He wasn't known for violence. In fact, most people described him as reserved. But beneath the surface, Tyler was slipping into something darker, something not even his closest friends suspected. For weeks, Tyler had been talking about throwing a party. Not just any party, a massive one. But every time he brought it up, he'd add a strange twist, that he would have to kill his parents first. Friends dismissed it as a joke, a twisted attempt at humor. Tyler had always been a little offbeat, they said. No one took him seriously. Until he followed through. On the afternoon of July 16th, Tyler waited until his parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, were home. Then, using a framing hammer, he bludgeoned them both to death, his mother first, then his father. He covered their bodies with towels, books, and debris, and dragged them into the master bedroom. Then, with their corpses lying just feet away, he began cleaning the house. What came next defies logic. Tyler posted a message on Facebook: "Party at my house tonight. Hit me up." That night, between 40 and 60 teenagers crowded into the Hadley home. They drank, smoked, blasted music, and laughed, completely unaware that 2 murdered bodies were decomposing in the next room. Some guests reported that Tyler seemed unusually nervous. Others said he was giddy, like he was on edge or high. But still, no one imagined the truth, and yet, he told them. Not everyone, but a few. At one point during the party, Tyler pulled aside his best friend, Michael Mandel. In a quiet voice, he confessed that he had killed his parents. Michael didn't believe him until Tyler showed him the crime scene. He opened the door to the master bedroom and let his friend see the blood, the feet sticking out from under the pile of blankets. Michael was horrified, but instead of calling the police, he continued partying. In his own words, he wasn't sure if it was real or if he was dreaming. The next morning, Michael finally tipped off a crime hotline. Police arrived soon after. They found the house trashed, empty beer bottles littered across the floor. In the bedroom, they uncovered the bodies of Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, both brutally beaten to death. Blood spatter marked the walls and ceiling. The hammer, still bloody, was found between the bodies. Tyler was arrested that morning. When questioned, he confessed in full. He told detectives he'd been planning the murders for 3 weeks. He had stopped taking his antidepressants and had spent hours researching how to commit the crime online. His motive? He said he didn't want his parents to stop him from partying. There were no signs of long-term abuse. His parents weren't overly strict. In fact, they had been trying to help him. His mother, a teacher, had recently convinced him to see a psychiatrist. His father had bought him books and helped him with his future plans. But none of it mattered to Tyler. In his own words, he said, "It had to be done." Psychiatrists later diagnosed him with a range of mental health issues, including depression and possible early-onset schizophrenia. But despite his age, he was tried as an adult. In 2014, Tyler Hadley was sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. What makes this case so horrifying isn't just the brutality of the murders. It's the calmness, the calculation, and the fact that he celebrated immediately afterward. For most people, killing someone would be unthinkable. But for Tyler Hadley, it was the price of popularity. He turned his family home into a house of horror, then invited the whole town over to dance on the grave. Even now, the case raises uncomfortable questions. How could no one have seen the signs? Why didn't anyone call the police during the party, after he started confessing? And more disturbingly, would he have done it again if he hadn't been caught? The Hadley home was eventually demolished. A vacant lot now sits where the tragedy happened. But the story still lingers, passed down online as an urban legend. The killer party, the teen who murdered for attention. Number 3. Nehemiah Griego, the boy who killed his entire family and planned to kill more. In January of 2013, in the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, police responded to what they believed was a welfare check. A local pastor had received a strange message from a teenage boy in his congregation. What they found when they entered the Griego household would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Inside the home, 5 family members lay dead, shot execution style. The killer wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a man with a long criminal history. He was 15-year-old Nehemiah Griego, the family's middle son. And what made the case even more disturbing was what he planned to do next. Nehemiah had grown up in a deeply religious household. His father, Greg Griego, was a former gang member who had turned his life around and become a pastor. The family was large, conservative, and devoutly Christian. On the outside, they looked picture perfect, but inside, Nehemiah had been quietly falling apart. He had grown increasingly isolated, angry, depressed, and obsessed with violence. He spent long hours alone, listening to music, playing violent video games, and fantasizing about killing. He kept a secret journal where he wrote in detail about murder. But no one in his family seemed to notice just how far gone he was until it was too late. On the morning of January 19, 2013, Nehemiah took a .22 caliber rifle from his parents' closet. He first walked into his mother's bedroom, where she was sleeping beside his 9-year-old brother Zephaniah. Without hesitation, he raised the rifle and shot his mother in the head. Then he turned the gun on his little brother, killing him as well. He reloaded and waited in the house until his 2 younger sisters, ages 5 and 2, began to stir. He killed them next. Then, hours later, when his father returned home from a night shift, Nehemiah ambushed him at the front door, shooting him multiple times with an AR-15. 5 family members, gone in a matter of hours. But the most terrifying part? That wasn't the end of his plan. Nehemiah wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't even hiding the crime. Instead, he changed his clothes, packed up the guns, and drove to his church, where he told members that his family had died in a car crash. He appeared calm, cold, emotionless. When questioned, he eventually confessed, not just to the murders, but to what he was planning next. Nehemiah told investigators he intended to go on a mass shooting spree. He had mapped out his route. He wanted to drive to a nearby Walmart and start killing random people. His goal was to cause as much death and destruction as possible before being killed by police. He even had a list of places he wanted to target, including a local school. The only reason he didn't follow through, he claimed, was that he lost his nerve. Investigators were stunned. Nehemiah wasn't just a disturbed kid who snapped. He was deliberate, calculating. He had studied mass shootings and admired the killers. He idolized the Columbine shooters. In his confession, he told detectives that he had been thinking about killing for years. And when asked why he did it, his answer was chillingly simple. He said he was bored and wanted to feel what it was like. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Here was a 15-year-old, intelligent, and seemingly normal, who had carried out a massacre that mirrored the most infamous mass shootings in American history. But he hadn't been influenced by gangs or peer pressure. He wasn't under the control of someone older. He was alone. He did it of his own free will. Prosecutors moved to try Nehemiah as an adult. The defense argued he was mentally ill, that he suffered from trauma and emotional neglect. A psychological evaluation revealed signs of depression and emerging personality disorders. But the prosecution painted a different picture: a boy who showed no remorse, no empathy, and no real grasp of the pain he had caused. Years of legal back and forth followed. Nehemiah was initially sentenced as a juvenile, meaning he could have walked free by age 21. But in 2019, that decision was overturned. A judge ruled that he would instead serve 3 life sentences plus an additional 7 years, though with the possibility of parole. If released, it won't be until he's in his 70s. What makes the Griego case so terrifying isn't just the body count. It's the clarity with which Nehemiah acted. The calmness, the preparation, the total lack of remorse. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He simply killed his family, changed clothes, and made plans to kill more. Neighbors would later say there were no obvious red flags. No one expected the quiet boy with the buzz cut and polite manners to become a mass murderer. But inside his mind, something monstrous had been growing, unchecked, unnoticed, and unstoppable. Today, the Griego home sits empty, a quiet reminder of the horror that unfolded behind its doors. A church-going family, torn apart not by drugs, gangs, or poverty, but by one of their own. Number 4. Barry Loukaitis, the teen who brought a Western fantasy to class. It was just after lunch on February 2nd, 1996, at Frontier Middle School in Moses Lake, Washington. Students were filing into their 5th period algebra class, the kind of ordinary day where kids trade jokes, worry about pop quizzes, and dream of the weekend. But for one student, 14-year-old Barry Loukaitis, this day was anything but ordinary. He had come to school dressed like a Wild West outlaw. Underneath his long black duster coat, he was hiding 2 handguns and a high-powered rifle. And he had every intention of using them. At exactly 1 p.m., Barry walked into his algebra class, pulled out his weapons, and opened fire. He shot and killed his teacher, Lionel Tate, on the spot. Then he turned his attention to the students. He killed 14-year-old Arnoldo Davila and 13-year-old Manuel Vela. A 3rd student was critically wounded. The rest of the class was frozen, some ducking, some screaming, some paralyzed in shock. But Barry wasn't screaming. He wasn't rushing. He was calm, methodical, like he was following a script. He stood in the front of the classroom, gun in hand, and uttered a line taken directly from the movie Natural Born Killers. "This sure beats algebra, doesn't it?" That wasn't the only piece of fiction he drew from. Barry had spent months obsessed with violent books, dark music, and films glorifying chaos. He was particularly drawn to westerns and novels by Stephen King. His favorite character? A villain who killed his own classmates. But Barry wasn't just copying fiction. He was also driven by something far more personal: rage. In the months leading up to the shooting, his home life had spiraled into chaos. His parents were in the middle of a bitter divorce. He claimed his mother was emotionally unstable, suicidal, and frequently confided in him like he was her therapist. His father, by contrast, was cold and distant. Barry felt like a ghost in his own home, ignored, pressured, and angry. He also claimed to be the target of bullying at school. Other students teased him for being awkward, for dressing differently, for keeping to himself. That isolation grew into bitterness. He began to fantasize, not just about revenge, but about power. He wanted to feel in control. He wanted to be feared. So he planned his attack. He stole guns from his father's cabinet. He studied past school shootings. He picked a classroom he knew would be full. And when the day came, he walked in with the confidence of a movie villain. The rampage might have continued had it not been for one man. John Lane, a heroic teacher, tackled Barry while he was distracted and managed to wrestle the rifle from his hands. Barry was arrested on the scene. He offered no resistance. And when asked why he did it, he responded coldly, I wanted to see what it felt like to kill people. It didn't take long for the case to make national headlines. A 14-year-old killer, inspired by Hollywood violence, walking into school like a character from a film, that image haunted parents, teachers, and students across America. Barry Loukaitis became one of the first modern school shooters in the country, years before Columbine and the tragedies that followed. During his trial, his defense argued insanity. They claimed he was suffering from bipolar disorder and depression. They pointed to his obsession with violent media, his dysfunctional home, his suicidal thoughts. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw premeditation, planning, a desire to kill, not a cry for help. Barry Loukaitis was convicted of 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, 1 count of first-degree murder, and multiple charges of kidnapping and assault. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 205 years, without the possibility of parole. Today, Barry remains behind bars, one of the earliest examples of a teenager turning fantasy into real-life horror. His case sparked national debates about gun control, media violence, and mental health. But perhaps the most disturbing element wasn't the tools he used. It was how he viewed the world. Like it was one big stage, and he was finally the main character. The classroom where the massacre took place was eventually remodeled. The school worked hard to move on. But for those who were there that day, the memory never really fades. A normal algebra class turned into a war zone. And a 14-year-old boy, angry and alone, made sure everyone would remember his name. Number 5. Kip Kinkel, the teen who killed his parents, then brought chaos to school. In May of 1998, the quiet town of Springfield, Oregon, was shattered by one of the most devastating school shootings in American history. The perpetrator wasn't a hardened criminal or an adult with a history of violence. He was 15-year-old Kip Philip Kinkel, a soft-spoken, intelligent high school sophomore with a dark storm brewing beneath the surface. Kip was the youngest child of 2 schoolteachers. His parents, Bill and Faith Kinkel, were respected in their community, known for their dedication to education and their loving home. But Kip didn't fit the mold. He struggled academically and socially. Diagnosed with dyslexia as a child, he was held back in the 1st grade. He was awkward, angry, and fascinated by guns and explosives from a very young age. His obsession with violence was more than just a phase. Kip collected weapons, read books about bomb making, and idolized mass murderers. He frequently talked about killing and destruction, often masking it as dark humor. But behind the jokes was something far more serious. He was deeply mentally ill. Kip was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a diagnosis that wouldn't fully emerge until after the tragedy. In the months leading up to the shooting, he began to hear voices in his head. These voices told him that the world was evil, that he was doomed, and that he had to act. On May 20th, 1998, Kip was suspended from Thurston High School for possessing a stolen handgun. His father picked him up from school and brought him home. Later that afternoon, Kip shot his father in the back of the head with a .22 caliber rifle. When his mother returned home a few hours later, Kip met her in the garage. He shot her multiple times, once in the face, then several more times as she lay on the ground. After murdering his parents, Kip spent the rest of the evening alone in the house, pacing, listening to music, and preparing for what came next. The following morning, he packed a rifle, 2 pistols, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition into a long trench coat and drove to Thurston High. At approximately 7:55 a.m. on May 21st, Kip entered the school cafeteria, pulled out a semi-automatic rifle, and opened fire. Within seconds, chaos erupted. He shot 17-year-old Ben Walker in the head, killing him instantly. Then he shot 16-year-old Mikhail Nikolausen. Over 20 other students were injured, many seriously. The scene was pure terror, tables overturned, students screaming and running for their lives. But then something extraordinary happened. Several students, unarmed and bleeding, rushed Kip and tackled him to the ground. One of them, Jake Riker, had already been shot but still managed to help subdue him. As Kip lay pinned beneath them, he reportedly muttered, "Kill me. Just kill me." When police arrived, they found a note in his trench coat. It was a confession, written with chilling clarity. In it, Kip expressed his hatred of himself, his parents, and the world. He said he had no hope, no future, and that the voices in his head had won. He ended the letter with the words, "I have just killed my parents. I don't know what is happening. I love my mom and dad so much. I just got 2 felonies on my record. My parents can't take that." During interrogation, Kip broke down. He told police he had to kill his parents because he didn't want them to be disappointed in him. He said he couldn't live with the shame. In his delusional thinking, murdering them felt like a twisted form of mercy. Kip was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. Although his lawyers pushed for an insanity defense, Kip ultimately pled guilty. He was sentenced to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The Thurston High shooting sent shockwaves across the country. It happened just 1 year before Columbine and marked a turning point in how America viewed school violence. Kip Kinkel wasn't a gang member. He wasn't abused. He came from a loving middle-class family. And that, in many ways, is what terrified people the most. What do you do when the killer is someone who had every opportunity, every advantage, and still chose destruction? In prison, Kip has reportedly been medicated and stable for years. He's even spoken out about mental illness and expressed deep remorse for his actions. But for the victims, those who died, those who were injured, and those who carry trauma to this day, remorse can't erase what was lost. To this day, Kip remains behind bars in the Oregon State Correctional Institution. His case is often cited in debates over juvenile sentencing, mental illness in teens, and the warning signs we too often overlook. The home where he killed his parents has long since been sold. Thurston High has healed, but not forgotten. Every May, survivors gather in remembrance. And the name Kip Kinkel is still spoken, not out of curiosity, but as a reminder of what can happen when the signs are missed, and a young mind collapses into violence. Number 6. Luke Woodham, the teen who killed for revenge and belonging. On the morning of October 1st, 1997, the town of Pearl, Mississippi, woke to an unimaginable horror. Just after 8 a.m., shots rang out at Pearl High School. Students screamed and ran as their classmate, 16-year-old Luke Woodham, opened fire with a hunting rifle, aiming directly at people he once called friends. 2 students were killed. 7 others were injured. But what few knew in that moment was that the carnage had started long before Luke ever stepped foot on campus that day. The first victim had been his own mother. Hours earlier, Luke had stood in the kitchen of his modest home. His mother, Mary Ann Woodham, was making breakfast. Without warning, he grabbed a butcher knife and stabbed her multiple times. She stumbled, trying to escape, but Luke kept attacking until she collapsed. Then he cleaned himself up, got dressed, and left for school, with her lifeless body still inside the house. His plan wasn't impulsive. He had written a manifesto the night before, a 2-page rant explaining his motives. In it, Luke called his mother a malicious, evil woman and claimed he had endured a life of emotional abuse. He also vented about being bullied at school, rejected by a former girlfriend, and being labeled an outcast. His words were filled with bitterness, self-pity, and something far more dangerous, an emerging belief that his pain gave him license to destroy. Armed with a rifle concealed beneath a long coat, Luke entered the school parking lot and opened fire. His first target was his ex-girlfriend, 16-year-old Christina Menefee. He shot her in the chest, killing her instantly. He then turned the gun on her friend, 17-year-old Lydia K. Dew, who was also killed. Luke kept shooting, hitting 7 others, some of whom were left with permanent injuries. But then something unexpected happened. Assistant Principal Joel Myrick, an Army Reserve commander, ran to his car, retrieved his personal handgun, and confronted Luke as he was trying to flee. Myrick ordered him to the ground and held him at gunpoint until police arrived. It was a moment of real-life heroism that likely prevented further tragedy. Luke's car had been packed with more ammunition. There's strong evidence he had planned to drive to nearby schools and continue his rampage. Once in custody, Luke confessed, but not just to the shooting. He also told investigators about a secret organization he had joined, a group of self-proclaimed teenage Satanists. They called themselves the Croth. Led by another student, Grant Boyette, the group fantasized about black magic, rebellion, and death. Luke claimed that Grant had manipulated him, feeding into his anger and convincing him that murder would make him powerful, that killing his mother and classmates would somehow cleanse his pain. Authorities were skeptical. There was no clear evidence of satanic rituals or supernatural practices. But it was clear that the group had existed, and that Luke had become entangled in a toxic web of manipulation and delusion. Whether it was a genuine cult or just a group of lost, angry teenagers playing with fire, the influence was real, and it had deadly consequences. In court, Luke's defense tried to argue insanity. His lawyers claimed he had experienced a psychotic break, fueled by emotional trauma and the cult-like influence of his peers. But the jury didn't see a boy who snapped. They saw a boy who planned, who wrote a manifesto, who cleaned up after stabbing his mother, put on his school uniform, and chose to kill again. Luke Woodham was found guilty of 2 counts of murder, 7 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of matricide. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his mother, plus 2 additional life sentences for the school shootings, along with 140 years for the attempted murders. He will never be eligible for parole. Today, Luke remains incarcerated in a Mississippi state prison. Over the years, he's given rare interviews, claiming he has found religion, that he regrets what he did, and that he was brainwashed. But for the families of his victims, the pain hasn't faded. For them, forgiveness is complicated, and forgetting is impossible. The Pearl High School shooting marked a chilling turning point. It was one of the first high-profile school shootings in modern American history. It happened just months before the West Side Middle School shooting in Arkansas, and less than 2 years before Columbine. Luke Woodham's actions opened the door to a dark new era, one where teenage shooters would no longer be seen as unthinkable anomalies, but as real threats. The tragedy raised countless questions. How does a teenager come to believe that murder will bring him peace? How does a child raised in a middle-class home, surrounded by teachers, peers, and parents, slip so far into darkness that killing feels like the only option? Pearl High School continues to operate. The building has been renovated. New students walk the same hallways, unaware of the blood that was once spilled there. But for those who lived through that day in 1997, the memory remains sharp, like a scar that never quite fades. Number 7. Lionel Tate, the youngest American ever sentenced to life without parole. In 1999, a quiet neighborhood in Broward County, Florida, became the center of national controversy when a 12-year-old boy named Lionel Tate committed a crime so severe it sent shockwaves through the American legal system. At the time, no one could quite believe it. A middle schooler, barely a teenager, was being tried for murder. And not just any murder, Lionel would become the youngest person in U.S. history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The victim was 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, a cheerful and loving little girl who was being babysat by Lionel while her mother was out for the evening. Lionel's mother, Kathleen Grosset Tate, was in the home at the time, but claimed she had been upstairs when it all happened. By the time she came down, Tiffany was lying unresponsive on the floor. At first, Lionel said it was an accident. He told police they had just been playing. But the autopsy told a much darker story. Tiffany had been beaten to death. Her injuries were extensive, so severe they resembled those of someone who had fallen from a 3-story building. Her liver was lacerated, her skull was fractured, and she had multiple internal injuries and bruises covering her body. The brutality of the attack immediately ruled out any suggestion of a minor scuffle. This wasn't roughhousing, it was a beating. Lionel's defense claimed that he was mimicking professional wrestling moves he'd seen on TV. He was a fan of WWE, then known as WWF, and had spent hours watching stars like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin perform body slams and elbow drops. His lawyers argued that Lionel didn't intend to kill Tiffany. He didn't understand the consequences. He was just a child, acting out what he saw on television. But the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued that even at 12 years old, Lionel knew the difference between play and violence. He didn't just accidentally hurt Tiffany, he pummeled her for over 5 minutes. They said the sheer force of the injuries proved intent. And because Florida law at the time allowed juveniles to be tried as adults for serious crimes, Lionel was charged with first-degree murder. The trial was swift and controversial. In 2001, 2 years after the killing, Lionel was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence ignited a firestorm of debate. Child psychologists, legal experts, and human rights organizations weighed in. Was it justice, or was it a failure of the system to understand the mind of a child? For many, it was hard to reconcile the idea that a 12-year-old could truly comprehend the weight of a murder charge, let alone serve life without ever having a chance at release. The case became a symbol of America's tough-on-crime policies and the blurred line between justice and punishment. In 2004, after years of public pressure and appeals, an appellate court overturned Lionel's conviction. The court ruled that his mental competency had not been adequately assessed before trial. The state offered him a plea deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder and receive a sentence of 1 year of house arrest, followed by 10 years of probation. But Lionel's story didn't end there. In 2005, just 1 year after his release, Lionel was arrested again, this time for armed robbery. He and an accomplice were accused of holding up a pizza delivery man at gunpoint. Prosecutors argued that Lionel had not been rehabilitated. They said the original sentence had been too lenient. In 2006, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for violating his probation. What makes Lionel Tate's case so haunting isn't just the crime. It's the entire trajectory of his life. From a 12-year-old killer to a symbol of judicial overreach to a repeat offender, it raises uncomfortable questions about how society handles violent youth. Was Lionel a product of poor parenting, media influence, a broken system, or was he always destined to fall through the cracks? Even now, experts are divided. Some believe Lionel never fully understood the consequences of his actions. Others argue that he manipulated the system and exploited sympathy. What's clear is that a 6-year-old girl lost her life in a moment of unimaginable violence, and the boy responsible lost his future before it even began. Today, Lionel Tate remains incarcerated. He is no longer a boy, but a man in his late 30s. He has spent most of his life behind bars. Tiffany Unick's family, meanwhile, continues to grieve a child who never got the chance to grow up. Number 8. Alyssa Bustamante, the teenage girl who killed out of curiosity. In the quiet town of St. Martin's, Missouri, the fall of 2009 was like any other, calm, uneventful, and surrounded by trees just starting to turn gold and red. But on October 21st, that calm shattered forever when a 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Olten vanished on her walk home from a friend's house. It was a short walk, just a few hundred yards through a wooded shortcut. She never made it. Elizabeth's family searched frantically. Neighbors joined in. Police launched a massive search operation. For 2 days, they combed the woods and questioned locals. But nothing prepared them, or the world, for what they were about to uncover. Elizabeth hadn't been abducted by a stranger. She hadn't run away. She had been murdered by someone who lived just down the road, a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa wasn't the type of person people suspected. She lived with her grandmother, attended church regularly, and was an honor roll student. But beneath that exterior, something was badly broken. Her father was in prison. Her mother struggled with substance abuse. Alyssa had a long history of depression, self-harm, and emotional instability. She had once attempted suicide and had been under psychiatric care. Still, no one expected violence. But Alyssa wasn't just suffering in silence. She was planning. Just days before the murder, she had dug 2 shallow graves in the woods behind her home. Not 1, 2. And then she waited. On October 21st, Alyssa saw Elizabeth walking home alone. The opportunity was too perfect. She lured the little girl into the woods, strangled her, slit her throat, and stabbed her in the chest. Then, she dragged the body to one of the graves she had prepared in advance and buried her. When police questioned Alyssa, she at first denied any knowledge of Elizabeth's disappearance. But something about her answers didn't sit right. Eventually, after intense interrogation, she led them to the burial site. And when investigators searched her bedroom, they found something chilling, a journal entry written in ink just hours after the murder. In her own handwriting, Alyssa had confessed to killing Elizabeth. She wrote, "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead." The next line was even more disturbing. "It was amazing. As soon as you get over the 'oh my god, I can't do this' feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." It was the kind of confession that chills your blood. Not just because of what she did, but because of how casually she described it. There was no remorse, no hesitation. Just a cold, calculated diary entry from a 15-year-old who had just murdered a 9-year-old girl. During court proceedings, Alyssa's defense team leaned heavily into her mental health history. They argued that she had been deeply depressed, that she was a product of a broken home, and that she lacked the emotional maturity to understand the full weight of her actions. But prosecutors had one thing that couldn't be debated: motive. Alyssa had killed for one reason: curiosity. She wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. That statement, so blunt, so horrifying, became the centerpiece of the case. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't even revenge. It was an experiment, one that cost a 9-year-old her life. In 2012, Alyssa Bustamante pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years. She will be eligible for parole, but not for several decades. By then, she will be a middle-aged woman, having spent more than half her life behind bars. The case drew national attention, not just because of Alyssa's age, but because of her motive. America had seen teen killers before, but rarely one who admitted to killing out of boredom. Rarely one who wrote about it like it was a thrill. In the aftermath, Elizabeth Olten's family was left shattered. Her mother described her daughter as sweet, loving, and always smiling. A little girl who trusted someone she should have been able to. Someone who lived just down the street. Alyssa's home was eventually sold. The woods behind it, where she dug the graves, are still there. Overgrown now, quiet. But that ground holds a darkness that won't easily be forgotten. The Bustamante case is often used in debates about juvenile sentencing, mental health care for at-risk youth, and the dangers of untreated psychological trauma. But perhaps the most haunting part is its simplicity. A girl killed another girl for no reason other than to satisfy a twisted curiosity, and she would have done it again. In fact, when police asked her why she had dug 2 graves, Alyssa answered flatly, "I wanted to kill 2 people." Number 9. Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, the boys who turned a playground into a war zone. On March 24, 1998, the small town of Jonesboro, Arkansas, was forever changed. At Westside Middle School, just before lunchtime, the fire alarm rang out unexpectedly. Students and teachers calmly exited the building, assuming it was a routine drill. But what awaited them outside was not a fire or a malfunction. It was an ambush, planned with military precision and carried out by two of their own classmates. Mitchell Johnson was 13. Andrew Golden was just 11. The boys had pulled the alarm themselves. As the school emptied into the open courtyard, they opened fire from a nearby wooded area using rifles and handguns they had stolen from Golden's grandfather. Dressed in camouflage, hidden behind trees, they unleashed a barrage of bullets on unsuspecting children and staff. The chaos was immediate. Screams, blood, children falling to the ground. In just a matter of minutes, 5 people were dead, 4 students and 1 teacher. 10 more were wounded, many critically. The teacher, Shannon Wright, died shielding a 6th grader with her own body. Among the dead were 11-year-old Paige Herring and 12-year-old Stephanie Johnson. Their only crime was walking out of school when the alarm told them to. The shooters dropped their weapons and tried to flee, but police quickly caught them without a struggle. As they were being arrested, officers were stunned, not just by their ages, but by what they found. In the van the boys had used to reach the school, authorities discovered food, camping gear, more weapons, and survival supplies. This wasn't a spontaneous attack. It was a mission, planned in advance, executed with chilling calm, and clearly designed to end with an escape. Why would 2 boys, barely teenagers, plan something so deadly? The motives were as disturbing as the act itself. Mitchell had recently been suspended for making sexual advances toward a girl at school and threatening to rape another. He was angry, rejected. He reportedly told friends he would get even. Andrew, though younger, was described by classmates as strange and aggressive, obsessed with guns and with playing soldier. Together, they fed off each other's rage, crafting a plan to exact revenge on their school and anyone who crossed them. In the aftermath, the town of Jonesboro was paralyzed with grief. But what came next stunned the nation even more. Because of their ages, Mitchell and Andrew couldn't be tried as adults under Arkansas law at the time. They were both sent to juvenile detention, where the maximum sentence was until they turned 21. 5 lives ended, 10 others permanently scarred, and the 2 boys responsible would serve less than 8 years behind bars. Public outrage exploded. Parents of the victims pleaded with lawmakers. How could mass murderers walk free before their 22nd birthdays? But legally, the state's hands were tied. The case exposed major flaws in juvenile justice systems across the country. New laws were drafted in the years that followed, but for the families in Jonesboro, the damage had already been done. Mitchell Johnson was released in 2005. Andrew Golden followed in 2007. Both boys were given new identities in an attempt to protect them from retaliation. But their lives didn't return to normal. Mitchell was arrested multiple times after his release, on charges ranging from possession of marijuana to theft and illegal possession of firearms. In interviews, he appeared emotionless when discussing the shooting. He once said he didn't care whether people forgave him. Golden kept a lower profile, but in a dark twist of fate, he died in a car crash in 2019. He was 33 years old. The West Side shooting was one of the first mass school shootings in the U.S. committed by juveniles. It predated Columbine by a year, and yet its legacy is often overshadowed by later, more widely publicized attacks. Still, what happened in Jonesboro left an indelible scar, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of how young the killers were and how quickly they were released. The school eventually reopened. The courtyard where the shooting happened was remodeled. But for those who were there that day, the memories remain vivid. A fire alarm, a sunny day, and the sudden crack of gunfire. A normal moment turned into a nightmare. And the most haunting part? It was all by design. These weren't panicked kids who snapped. They waited. They watched. They opened fire when their classmates were most vulnerable, walking in single file, heads down, following school safety protocols. Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden weaponized trust and routine. They turned the very drills meant to protect students into tools of destruction. Even decades later, the West Side Massacre stands as a chilling reminder of what can happen when anger, alienation, and access to weapons collide, especially in the minds of children who still believe the world owes them something. Number 10. Jasmine Richardson, the 12-year-old who helped butcher her entire family, Alberta, Canada, a quiet prairie town better known for farmland and family life than the kind of brutality that would soon shock the entire nation. It was here, in April 2006, that 3 members of the Richardson family were found murdered in their home. The victims were Mark and Deborah Richardson and their 8-year-old son, Jacob. They had been stabbed repeatedly, left to bleed out in their own suburban sanctuary. At first, investigators feared the worst. Had the family been targeted by a stranger? A break-in gone horribly wrong? But then they noticed something chilling. One member of the family was missing. Not a suspect, a potential victim. Their 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine Richardson. But Jasmine wasn't missing. She wasn't kidnapped. And she certainly wasn't a victim. Within hours, police tracked her down over 80 miles away, found laughing, kissing, and holding hands with her 23-year-old boyfriend, Jeremy Steinke. That's when the horrifying truth began to unravel. Jasmine hadn't escaped the murders. She had helped plan them. She had helped carry them out. A 12-year-old child had participated in the slaughter of her entire family because they stood in the way of her forbidden love. Jasmine had met Jeremy on a social networking site designed for goth teens. He was 23 years old, heavily involved in vampire subculture, and claimed to be a 300-year-old werewolf. Jasmine, who came from a middle-class church-going family, quickly fell under his spell. She was just entering adolescence, rebellious, emotionally volatile, and fascinated by dark fantasy. When her parents found out about the relationship, they were horrified. They grounded her, took away her computer, and tried to cut off all contact. But the damage had already been done. Jeremy encouraged Jasmine to believe that her parents were abusive, controlling, and oppressive. And Jasmine, desperate to hold on to the attention of someone so much older, so intense, began to believe it. Together, they devised a solution. If her parents wouldn't allow them to be together, then her parents had to die. On the night of April 23, 2006, Jeremy entered the Richardson home wearing a mask and carrying a knife. He attacked Mark and Deborah first, stabbing them both multiple times. Deborah fought back, even managing to grab a screwdriver in a desperate attempt to defend herself. But the force of Jeremy's rage was overwhelming. Upstairs, Jasmine confronted her little brother, 8-year-old Jacob. According to her later confession, he was scared and confused. He begged her not to hurt him, but Jasmine stabbed him in the chest, claiming later that she thought it would be more humane than letting him be an orphan. Let that sink in. A 12-year-old girl murdered her 8-year-old brother because she thought it was a kindness. After the killings, Jasmine and Jeremy fled the scene. They were caught the next day, seemingly unfazed by what they'd done. Witnesses said they acted like a couple on a romantic getaway, not two people running from a triple homicide. Jeremy even bragged to friends that he had gutted Jasmine's parents like fish. When questioned by police, Jasmine showed no immediate remorse. She was calm. She admitted her involvement, even described parts of the crime in graphic detail. Jeremy, for his part, was proud of what they'd done. He said it was a natural end to their love story. In court, the prosecution laid out a narrative that sounded almost fictional: star-crossed lovers, a forbidden romance, and a murder pact made in teenage code. But the evidence was real: emails, journal entries, online chats. In one message, Jasmine had written, "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." It was cold, premeditated, not a spontaneous act of violence, but a strategy. Because of her age, Jasmine could not be sentenced as an adult under Canadian law. She was tried as a minor and received the maximum sentence possible, 10 years. That included time in a psychiatric institution, followed by community supervision. She completed her sentence in 2016 at just 22 years old and was released with a new identity. She now lives somewhere in Canada, legally free. Jeremy Steinke, who later changed his name to Jackson May, is serving a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During his trial, he proposed to Jasmine through a letter. She accepted. The marriage was never legally recognized, but the disturbing nature of their bond continued to haunt those who followed the case. Jasmine Richardson's story forced people to reconsider what children are capable of. What happens when a child is manipulated? When fantasy and reality blur? When rage and infatuation collide in the mind of someone who still plays with dolls? Number 11. Daniel Petric, the teen who killed over a video game. In October 2007, in the small town of Wellington, Ohio, a 16-year-old boy named Daniel Petric committed a crime that left an entire community stunned and raised questions across the nation about parenting, mental health, and the growing obsession with violent video games. The case was as tragic as it was bizarre, because when the dust settled, Daniel's mother was dead, his father barely clinging to life, and the motive? A video game. Daniel grew up in a devout Christian household. His father, Mark Petric, was a respected pastor. Church was central to their lives. Discipline was strict, but not unusual. From the outside, the Petric family seemed solid, modest, hardworking, grounded in faith. But like so many families, what was visible on the surface didn't tell the whole story. In 2007, Daniel suffered a serious back injury that left him bedridden for weeks. During his recovery, he turned to video games to pass the time. One game in particular became his obsession, Halo 3, a futuristic first-person shooter filled with high-octane violence and alien warfare. For most teenagers, it was entertainment. For Daniel, it became an escape. As his obsession grew, so did his isolation. He stopped engaging with friends. His schoolwork suffered. His emotional world shrank to the size of a screen. His parents, concerned by the hours he was spending in front of the game, stepped in. They told him he was no longer allowed to play it. His father took the disc and locked it in a small safe in the house, a box that also contained the family's 9mm handgun. To Daniel, this wasn't just discipline. It was betrayal. On the night of October 20th, 2007, Daniel waited for the right moment. When both of his parents were home and seated on the couch, he quietly retrieved the key to the lockbox, took out the game, and the gun. Then he walked into the room, stood in front of his parents, and told them he had a surprise. Without warning, he raised the gun and shot his mother, Susan Petric, in the head. She died instantly. He then turned the gun on his father, Mark, and fired again. Mark was hit in the face and collapsed, blood pouring from his wounds. But he wasn't dead. Daniel then tried to stage the scene to look like a murder-suicide. He placed the gun in his father's hand and the Halo 3 case beside them. Then he fled the house, taking the game with him, and drove off in the family's car. While his father lay bleeding on the floor, Daniel showed up at a friend's house, acting like nothing had happened. He told his friend's parents that he had just had a fight with his folks, but inside the car was the smoking gun, literally. Alongside it sat Halo 3, resting on the passenger seat like a trophy. Meanwhile, something miraculous happened. Despite being shot in the head, Mark Petric managed to survive. He crawled to a phone and called for help. Police rushed to the scene. By the time they located Daniel, he was calm, cooperative, and disturbingly detached. He didn't try to hide what he'd done. When asked why, he simply said he was angry that his parents had taken his game away. At trial, the courtroom struggled to process the details. A teenager killing his own mother over a video game? Shooting his pastor father in the face because they enforced house rules? It sounded like a horror movie, not real life. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Daniel's defense team argued that he was under the influence of psychological distress. They said the weeks of isolation, paired with his obsession with the game, had damaged his mental state. They claimed he had become addicted, not just to Halo, but to the escape it offered. They painted him as a confused and unstable teen, not a cold-blooded killer. But the prosecution painted a far darker picture. They pointed to the planning, the retrieval of the key, the decision to bring the gun into the room, the deliberate shots to the head, and most damning of all, the attempt to stage the murder as a suicide. That, they argued, was not the behavior of a child who had snapped. It was the behavior of a killer who knew exactly what he was doing. The judge agreed. In 2009, Daniel Petric was found guilty of aggravated murder, attempted murder, and felonious assault. He was sentenced to 23 years to life in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until well into his 40s. Perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of the entire case is what happened after the trial. Despite everything, Mark Petric, the father who survived being shot in the face, testified on his son's behalf. He pleaded with the court to show mercy. He said he had forgiven Daniel, that he still loved him, that he believed his son had been manipulated by the influence of video games and untreated emotional pain. It's a powerful, gut-wrenching image. A man who lost his wife, nearly lost his own life, and still chose to show compassion to the very person who destroyed everything. Daniel Petric's case remains one of the most shocking examples of juvenile violence in modern America. Not just because of the brutality, but because of what it says about the thin line between fantasy and reality, especially in the minds of vulnerable teens. Was it really just about a game? Or was it the result of deeper cracks? Emotional, psychological, and cultural. Even today, debates rage on about the impact of violent video games on young minds. Most players don't commit crimes, but in rare, tragic cases like Daniel's, the lines blur, and fiction becomes fuel for real-world horror. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Do you think justice was truly served? Let me know your thoughts and where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.